Welcome back. So if you remember last time, Jeff had just started the layup for this one of the aileron spars, and here he is actually just closing it out. So took the bag off and all that good stuff, and then just putting the last layers on there and bag it again, and then that one will be done. And the other guys are finally on to doing the last of the molds for these ribs for the elevator and the foreplane. So you can see the top coat is on those ones ready to go, and these are the ones that have been finished off. So the guys will start cutting patterns for those soon. And onto the door, I'm actually getting ready to bond the lower skin on there, so I've just got it sitting on there right now. I actually put a bunch of clecos in there while I had it on the fuselage last and got it all nicely lined up. And here I've actually just showing you the inside there, just prepping it, and mainly this video is for us later on so we can see the inside of this, because you'll never be able to see it again once that's bonded. And I put those little channels there in case we ever have to squirt any foam in there to make that frame more rigid. Then it will only stay in the areas that we squirt the foam into. So that's kind of what it looks like there on the inside, and with all the door locks and all that drama that's been going on for months and months that we'll never do again because it was too complicated. But anyway, it's ready to have the skin bonded on now. And there it is on Thursday evening with all the clecos in and the high sole bonding it on, and a bunch of clamps around the outside just to make sure it all gets held down nicely. And that'll set up and be ready for Friday morning to take all that off of there. And here Jeff's in the process of doing the first round of layup there for the second of the aileron spars. And you can see he's already got everything in there just on the breather fabric right now, and getting ready to have it bagged. So that's the second one pretty much halfway done. And now we're on to Friday morning, and here's Zach putting down the heavyweight layers on the last of those molds. So there's about 4 of them left to do, and this is 2 on there that he's working on with the heavyweight layers. And there's the first of the aileron spars now out of the mold and ready to be trimmed off along the edges. As you can see, and there's the sort of curve at the end there that sort of wraps up into the winglet. So it's pretty lightweight, that one, because it just has some basic 1/4 inch core in there. And here's Keith and Jeremy working on their last of the 2 molds there for the ribs there for the elevator or the foreplane. I think those ones are for the elevator actually. So that's those down, and next week they'll be actually starting to make parts for those ones. And now that skin was bonded to the door frame there, I wanted to also try out again the actuator from the handle to the rest of the lock actuator there, just because that hard point was in the skin and it moved a little bit from where we actually had it originally done. But anyway, I got it all bolted up again now. I want to show you how it kind of works there. So you can see it's sort of linked to the door handle through there, and then another linkage across there, and it seems complicated, and all the other pin locks aren't hooked up right now. But anyway, you basically push on the front of this thing there, and then you can actually grab the inside of it and pull it open. But this is what it looks like when it actuates, and it comes past the over center and unlocks and then goes back the other way. And I'll show a much more detailed one on that later on when I've got it all together with the pin locks and everything. And so here's Jeff just in the process of finishing off trimming that aileron spar. So that's that first one done, and he's getting ready to do the spars for the foreplane next week now. And after that, the only spars remaining will be the main ones for each of the wings. And this is what that second one looks like after the first stage of the layup. So there you can see all the core in there, and it just needs to have the inside layers laid down and be bagged again, and that's what they worked on there Friday afternoon. And meanwhile, Jim's been continuing on a bunch of little jobs that are all related to the flight controls and rudder pedal or rudder controls and things like that. So here he's actually making these little clips that allow the aileron cables to be locked in place on the pulleys there. And my next job on the doors was to actually cut some core out to fill in these 2 sections, the upper and lower sections there, that are just basically the skin right now, because we need to make those stronger to handle the pressurization. We're going to put some 1/2 inch core in there, so you can see I've sort of got my templates made out of paper, and I've got the first one there cut out of some 1/2 inch sort of scrim core there that will curve around curves and corners. And there's Jeff and Devon have finished that layup there on that second aileron spar, and they got it under the bag. So that one's done there by the end of the day on Friday, and that'll be peeled out on Monday and trimmed off. And I got all the core pieces cut there and fitted nicely, so that's ready to be bonded in on Monday, and that'll be done under vacuum, so it gets sort of snugged in there nice and tight. And then after that, a layup will be put over there just to close all that out as well. And now onto the exciting stuff. So the engine was all ready to run now. I had that reducer fitting in there for the oil return for the second turbo. So I had actually fired it up earlier in the day just to make sure that my fuel flow readings were working correctly. And so now this is the end of day Friday, and just starting it up here and warming it up a little bit. Just to check out how things are working, and my goal was just mainly just to run it up to about a medium power, about 2700 RPM, and just see how the fuel flow was and use that to calculate the horsepower and such. So there you can see there's the fuel flow gauge there, 0.8, 0.9, 1 gallon an hour while it's idling, so that's pretty neat. And this should be pretty accurate the way it's running. And meanwhile there you want to see there's the new belts running with the larger pulleys, and they don't look much bigger than that, but it makes a difference. I could tell that the engine wasn't labouring as much just turning that prop. I actually had to reduce the fuel a little bit so it would idle, because it was high idling, much higher than it would with the same amount of fuel, because of the less load on there, kind of like being in a lower gear. But that was working out. Everything was looking nicely with that pulley, and the upper pulleys don't have the fences on them like the other ones did, so the belt's sort of free to move along there, and they're sitting nicely in the center, which is good. So the bottom pulleys still have the fences on them. They're the ones that keep the belts aligned there nicely. So anyway, here's the goal, was to just warm it up there and run it up to, as I said, about 2700 RPM, and then just bring it back to idle and check everything out and just make sure everything looked good with the pulleys and such before I ran it up to a higher power setting later. But anyway, I'll let you watch that. So everything seemed to be running fine with that little run up. I didn't, have it running for too long or anything like that. Just wanted to bring it up, and I ended up bringing it up to about 3,000 RPM, just because it didn't have any effort, or didn't take any effort to get it there with the amount of fuel, just because of this new ratio on the prop there. So we've gone from 1.43 to 1 up to 1.58 to 1. So it doesn't take as much effort now to spin the prop at the same RPM. Obviously the engine a higher RPM, but the prop same RPM. So anyway, it was all running good, and I just let it cool down now, and I actually had to make an adjustment because it wouldn't go back into idle right then, because it just had a little bit too much fuel to let it go down here. I'm actually just walking around and just checking, feeling the vibration on the engine, and also on the prop drive area there, and it's actually smoother than it was before, which was what I was expecting, because the old steel pulleys, when we had the centers machined out of those, I believe they were possibly slightly off center, so maybe they weren't perfectly balanced. But anyway, these new ones that have been machined from scratch, they're obviously perfectly round and perfectly balanced. So I did notice that was much smoother. There's still a little bit of vibration coming from the drive, and I suspect it's because this prop was just thrown together for us, and even though it has counterweights and stuff, it's probably not as accurately balanced as a brand new one. I suspect when we get a new prop, everything would be much, much smoother. Anyway, so I let the engine cool down, and then actually shut it down completely, and then I checked over everything with the belts, and all looked good, so I said, well, let's fire it up again. And so this is what happened after I fired up the second time. I'll let you watch this. this time I really pushed it up to sort of max power settings, and I was really keeping an eye on the EGTs. I didn't want to get it much higher than about 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what I was watching for, and I'll show you in a second the output of this. But everything ran super smooth on there. I didn't have any problems, and you'll see in a second there, got it over 3800 RPM, which was the goal. And the fuel burn was just over 16 gallons an hour, which is really actually good. So that's kind of where I wanted it to be. Anyway, we'll go over that in a second, but overall everything ran really well with the engine. Didn't have any other problems at all. Happy with that new ratio now. So the next goal is to get the new redrive done. Mark's pretty much finished with the design of that. He's doing the drawings for the main shaft. That'll be sent off next week, and then after that we'll have the housing get sent off and get that one done. So hopefully it'll only be maybe, I don't know, 8 weeks or something. We'll start getting the bits and pieces back from that and be able to put that together. So if you're still hanging in there, still watching this video, let's go over the numbers. There's probably a bunch of people got bored by now and they clicked off, but anyway, for the rest of you guys who dig this stuff, here's the number. So there's the first run there that I did. As you can see, got it up over 3000 RPM there, only burning just over 5 gallons an hour. So it doesn't burn very much at the low level or the low power settings there, which is really neat. And as you can see down the bottom here, there's the where I was sort of idling it and letting it cool down. And then here's the spot there. That's where I switched it off completely and then fired it back up again. And then, immediately after firing it up was where I did the power run right through there. And as you can see, took it up quite a lot more power there. So this is just zooming into that particular section, and as you heard in the video, this is how I stepped it up there with the throttle settings, just taking it along the way there from idle there at 900 RPM, and you can see they're just burning less than a gallon an hour at idle, which is pretty nice compared to a turboprop. And actually the engine really sounds like a turboprop the more you listen to it. It's amazing, really. Anyway, so stepping up through the different power settings there's again sort of 3000 RPM, 5 gallons an hour. It's not until you get sort of pushing it quite a bit harder that the fuel really cranks in when the boost kicks in. So there's 7 gallons an hour, and there we are, getting a little bit higher again into the teens, and here we are at the maximum. So there's 15.9, and if I just locate the sort of peak spot right there, there's 16.3, and I think the maximum was like 16.6. Yeah, there it is right there, 16.6 and over 3800 RPM. And the boost wasn't excessively high, 31 pounds of boost in total, but what I was really keeping an eye on there was the EGTs, and as you can see there, over 1300. And I think I'm going to actually move and get Britt to weld in a little weld bung there, so I can put a sensor in the Y pipe there and see actually how hot the exhaust is coming out of the engine directly, because that 1300 is coming out of the first turbo, and then the 800 is coming out of the second turbo. So I think everything getting compressed in that first turbo is really driving that temperature up, and maybe it's not quite that hot coming out of the engine. But anyway, I'll put a sensor there and we'll see what happens with that. So now that we have some real world fuel flow numbers, I wanted to compare it to my spreadsheet. So I put those numbers in there for the RPM and the boost and temperatures and such, just to see how this spreadsheet sort of plays out and compares with the fuel flows. And as you can see down the bottom here, it's basically showing 18 gallons, 18.2 gallons an hour for those power settings, and whereas we were seeing 16.6, so we're not far off really. And a lot of that has to do with the this fuel that we're using. So we're running the jet fuel, and the specific gravity of jet fuel, depending on you look, 0.82 or 0.85. So if you play with that, you can get sort of closer to 16.6. But as you can see there, 380 horsepower is what it's saying, and 500 plus pound-feet of torque. And at the prop, actually have to change this. That's wrong. That's with the old ratio. So I need to change that 1.43 to 1.58. and that gives us the torque at the prop, so over 800 foot-pounds at the prop, which is pretty cool compared to the TSIO 550 over there, which actually puts out 660. So we've got a lot more torque at the prop now, which is, that's what throws you back in the seat when you're accelerating down the runway. So that's going to feel good. So anyway, it's having 16.6 gallons an hour showing up. If I just put those numbers in up here, so 16.6 is what we were seeing from the fuel flow sensors, as you can see there. And if we just want to use those numbers, and so you multiply that by 6.8, which is how many pounds per gallon jet fuel is, so that gives you 112, and divide that by the specific fuel consumption of the Audi engine, a 0.326, which is what the recommended number is. That's with EGR and everything, and you get 340 horsepower out of there. So we're somewhere in between 340 and 380, I think, for that run. And so the next thing I still have to do is I got some new injector profiles to run that Motec has put out for the Bosch injectors. So that'll be what's happening next, and we'll see if that makes any difference. But overall, I'm super happy with how the engine's performing now. We're getting the power that I thought, because the fuel flow is there now to sort of back it up. Anyway, that's our update for this week, and thanks again for watching.